I feel like over the last couple of weeks pretty much every opinion on the whole Be Critical debate has been breached and expressed, so I'm not gonna go into all that because I'd pretty much be just repeating what everyone else has already said. However, it has highlighted the importance of informing viewers how we as booktubers individually review books, so that is what I'm going to be doing today. Hi everybody, it's Lydia here. So as I said, I'm not going to go into the whole debate. I don't think I'm really going to add anything if I do. So I just wanted to instead talk about one of the issues which I feel has been brought up from this whole debate, and that is understanding the reviewer and informing viewers what a review from that person means. Now, I am really bad at uploading individual review videos. However, I do know that when I upload other videos, whether it be tags or discussion videos or whatever, I'm always saying, oh, I love this book, oh, it's wonderful, you should read this book, and I don't really go into more detail because they aren't specific review videos. So this video is basically going to be a way of helping you understand what I mean when I say I love this book or I hate this book without having to go into all that detail. So I've basically selected 3 or 4 categories which I look at when I am reviewing a book and when I am developing my own opinions about a book. So let's do this. So the first category is characters. Now this is probably the most important category for me because I do feel that whatever kind of book you're reading, whether it's romance, horror, fantasy, sci-fi, contemporary, whatever it is, the characters are what drives the plot and what pushes everything along. Now, a brilliant character for me would be a character which is well developed, well rounded. In my Bookish Sweets tag video that I did on Tuesday this week, I talked about how I really love strong female characters. However, that is obviously not the kind of first thing that I look when I buy a book or when I read a book. But the reason I love that trope is because they have their own personality and they have their own development through the story. There's nothing that annoys me more than reading a book which itself is great, but then you have maybe the lead character but often side characters which just feel really flat. Say in a romance, if you have one character in the couple and another character, I hate it when you have one character which is just really flat, there's no development, there's nothing particularly to them aside from the fact that they are in this relationship with this other character who might happen to be absolutely brilliantly well developed. It's just really annoying when that happens because you feel like they are literally there for plot development. And yes, obviously the majority of characters in books are there for plot development, otherwise how would anything happen? But there needs to be more to a character than that, and it really bugs me when that doesn't happen. So I'm going to pick out a couple of characters from books that I've previously read that you will probably know for reference, so that in the future if I say I didn't think that character was well developed or I thought that character was brilliantly developed, then you know we're kind of on the scale at last. So at the top of the scale, where characters I think are brilliantly well developed, I'm going to go with pretty much all the characters from the Harry Potter series. I think J.K. Rowling is absolutely fantastic at developing characters and making sure that you feel like off screen or off page, even if they're not involved in a scene, they're still going about their own lives and you can imagine them doing this, this and this. And I think pretty much every character in this series is like that. So that is kind of the top of my scale, as it were. At the opposite end of the scale is the characters in the Twilight Saga by Stephenie Meyer. Now I know this book always gets trashed and I'm not going to go into that. The reason I've put it on this chart is simply because pretty much all of the characters in this series I cannot imagine doing anything outside the pages of this book. Even the lead characters, I don't have a clue what they would do outside of here, and for me that is pretty much terrible character development, so they are the bottom of my scale. So at the top you have Harry Potter, at the bottom you have Twilight, and in the middle I'm going to put the characters from the Grisha series. Now I put this in the middle because some of the characters I think are quite good, other ones I'm not so sure about. Alina, who is the lead character in the series, she is one of those characters that I feel does a lot of out of character things in the book itself. A lot of the times I don't know what she's doing, what's going on with her, and she does aggravate and annoy me quite a lot because of that. So in terms of a scale, that is directly between Twilight and Harry Potter. The second category I look at when I'm reviewing is writing style. Now, this varies a lot for me depending on genre. I feel like there are certain genres that can get away with more than other genres. For example, if you have a contemporary, I'm less likely to want lyrical, flourishing language, just because I feel contemporary is meant to be set in the real world, it's meant to be believable, and that language often makes me believe it less. On the other hand, there are genres that I do feel work well with that whole flourishing descriptions, lyrically beautifully written language, particularly things like Alice in Wonderland and those kind of more fairy tale-esque kind of stories I think work better with flourishing language. So if I were to take an example for this, a book that I feel works really well because of the flourishing language is Shades of Milk and Honey by Mary Robinette Kowal. This is largely because this book involves essentially people who are artists, so the language itself adds to describing what art they're creating. I say art in inverted commas because it's not really art, but that's about as close as I can get to describing it if you haven't read the book. But I feel that language really works with this book really well because it just adds to the whole creative artistry of it. On the other hand, I feel a book that had quite a lot of that language in but didn't suit it was We Were Liars by E. Lockhart. Now, I'm sorry to those of you who love this book. I know a lot of people do. For me, it just didn't work because it is meant to be a contemporary, it's set in the real world, we are meant to be able to believe these characters exist, and yet sometimes the language I found a bit too over the top because it just didn't suit the style for me. It felt quite... I'm always reticent to say amateur because I think there is a lot of great amateur literature, but for me it feels like the kind of writing I would have written in the early years of high school, and honestly that wasn't good. I'm not gonna lie, I wasn't a good writer in high school. Still, I'm not amazing, but I did use a lot of this kind of language, and when I read through those kind of stories that I wrote back then, I hate it, and this reminded me a lot of that. So that's kind of an example of where I feel the writing style doesn't work. I've mentioned this before, but I also have a kind of love for third-person books. I don't particularly enjoy first-person books. That said, there are a lot of books that I have read this year in particular that have been written in first-person, and I didn't dislike them, I enjoyed them, but personally for me, I prefer third-person because, honestly, because there is more description and I feel like I can get into the book more. So a great example for me is a book that I'm always mentioning, and that is The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. This book is jam-packed with description and it is often something that puts a lot of people off. However, I personally love it and think it really adds to the fantastical world of Middle-earth and really makes this book as great as it is. On the other hand, a book that was first person that I felt was lacking was Noggin by John Corey Whaley. I didn't finish this book, I didn't get very far because it felt really flat and I missed the description. I felt this kind of book might have worked better in third person, and maybe that's just because I prefer third person, but for me it just didn't work as is and felt just a bit dull, to be honest. The third category is plot development. Now for me this particularly relates to the structure of a book. There is nothing worse for me than reading a book which is poorly structured. A recent example of this for me is Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn. This is a book which I read because I thought, everyone goes on about Gone Girl, I'll read this first and then I'll read Gone Girl. I haven't read Gone Girl yet for the simple reason that I despised this book, and the majority of it was because of the plot structure. Now it starts off alright, but pretty much the middle 50% of the book is so goddamn slow that I was so bored. And then to top it all off, the big climax was gone within 2 chapters. I literally had to reread the page, and I say page because it literally was one page where everything kind of unravelled. I literally had to reread that because I missed it. I was like, wait a minute, that was the whole ending of the story and I've completely missed it. And that drove me mad because the entire book had been so slow up until that point, and then it was like bam, it's over, and I was just like, wait, what? It really bugged me, and that for me is just an example of terrible structure. On the other end of the scale, you have something like Atonement by Ian McEwan, which in my opinion is incredibly well structured. Obviously it's a very unique structure in itself because it's set in 3 different time periods, but the way each period is written is very clever and I enjoyed it. It's well paced. I didn't feel like there was any point in the book where I was waiting for something to happen. It was all just kind of flowing very nicely. It wasn't sort of bam, bam. So that is definitely the top end of the structure plot development scale. I mentioned just then about world building. That is my 4th category. However, it is kind of a 4th category in brackets because I don't feel like it applies to all genres. However, it is one of the main areas that I look at when I'm reading a fantasy book. I mentioned before how I thought Middle-earth was extremely well developed, and in my opinion it's probably the most extensively developed world. I also mentioned before about Harry Potter, and I do feel that in terms of modern day that is a pretty brilliant example of world building. And I've mentioned before how much I love the world building in The Bone Season. The fact that this is only the first book and yet I feel like we've seen an incredible amount of world building in this book. I'm really excited to see what happens over the next 6. It's gonna be massive. And obviously you can't talk about world building without talking about the Song of Ice and Fire series by George R.R. Martin. Obviously that is extremely vast and incredible, and yeah, wow. So those are my 4 categories. To recap: character, writing style, plot development, and in terms of fantasy, world building. Those are really the 4 categories that I look at when I am deciding whether it's a book I love and all the feels, or whether it's a book I despise and want to throw in the bin. So I hope that gives you an insight into how I form opinions on books and what books I enjoy. I do feel like this whole debate about reviews being worthless is a load of crap, because honestly, in my opinion, no review is worthless if you know the reviewer, and I think that is the most important thing. If you understand how a reviewer works or how a reviewer thinks and has opinions about a book, then you are going to understand when they say all the feels about a book, because you know that they also said that about this book or this book or this book and they hated that book. So as long as that is out there, in my opinion, you can't have a worthless review. Anyway, I will see you again tomorrow for a rather special video for Halloween, but until then, bye!